Hey there, this is David Day with Adorama TV, and today on Making Waves, we're going to take a broad look at microphones and see which are best to use in your home recording studio for different instruments and applications. First, a quick rundown of how microphones work. Essentially, microphones are a kind of transducer. They take one form of energy and convert it into another. In this case, they take acoustical energy, or sound waves, and convert it into electrical energy, the audio signal. Furthermore, the electrical current generated by microphones is very small, and because of this, they usually require what is known as a preamp. These are usually found in audio mixers and interfaces, and they help to boost the audio signal loud enough for us to hear or use it effectively. So if you don't have a mixer or audio interface that can plug into your computer, I recommend you get one right away if you're serious about having a home recording studio. I personally own 3 interfaces, with my favorites being the Focusrite 6i6 for mobile recording, like the setup behind me, and the TASCAM US-16x08, which has 8 XLR inputs and is great for something that requires a lot of microphones or a lot of instruments at once, like miking a drum kit, recording a whole band live, or even a podcast with several speakers. I've used it for all 3 of those scenarios and it works great. Unfortunately, they don't make the US-1800 anymore, but you can get the successor to that model, the TASCAM US-16x08. Anyways, let's talk about the different mics you'll be plugging into an interface. There are many different types of microphones, but the following 4 are the ones you'll probably run across for home studio recording: dynamic, condenser, ribbon, and USB. 9 out of 10 times, you will probably see or be using either a dynamic or condenser microphone. Ribbon and USB mics have their place, and we'll get to them, but for now, let's stick to the workhorses of the recording studio world. First up, dynamic mics. This is most likely the first mic you've ever come across, and it was probably either a Shure SM57 or Shure SM58, which are usually regarded as 2 of the most popular dynamic mics out there. Dynamic mics generate an audio signal from the movement of a magnetized coil. Sound pressure, such as singing into the mic, forces a small diaphragm to move the coil in a magnetic field, which generates a small electric current. Generally speaking, dynamic mics are built to withstand high sound pressure levels, or SPL, so they are durable. I've used dynamic mics that have been dropped, kicked, crushed, and even soaked in water, and they still worked. By the way, I don't recommend doing any of those things to your microphone. But accidents do happen, and these things will take a beating. That's one of the reasons they're used so much for live performances, along with the high SPL threshold, which comes in handy when the guitarist won't turn his amp down. Trust me, I'm a guitarist. It happens. Condenser microphones, like the Audio Technica AT2035, are much more sensitive than dynamic microphones. I don't mean they're gonna cry during a romantic comedy, but they do respond better to the nuances of sound waves. In condenser mics, a thin diaphragm vibrates from sound waves, changing the distance between it and a backplate, resulting in a difference in current, which produces the signal output. The relationship between the diaphragm and backplate form a capacitor, which requires an electrical charge. Because of this, condenser microphones require a battery or external power source. For recording studios, the condenser mics you'll be using will almost always use an external power source. More specifically, phantom power. You may see it on your audio interface listed as plus 48 volts or just 48 volts, but essentially it's just power being provided for your condenser microphone by your audio interface. If you don't have phantom power for condenser mics, they simply won't work. So before purchasing a condenser mic, make sure your audio interface can supply phantom power to your microphone. Ribbon microphones were the first commercially successful directional microphones, which saw the height of their popularity during the old-time radio days. Instead of sound pressure, ribbon mics respond to, a ribbon that vibrates from the velocity of air molecules pushing it. Ribbon mics also tend to have a flatter or more accurate high end response, so they're mostly used to record sources that have aggressive high end like drum overheads or guitar amps. They aren't as popular as condensers or dynamics, but there are still a few models out there if you feel like experimenting. Now, USB mics, like the Blue Yeti, are a relatively new technology that was ushered in with the personal computing revolution. They contain the same innards as most mics do, capsules, diaphragms, etc., but they also contain an onboard preamp and an analog to digital converter. Because of this, you don't need a preamp, mixer, or audio interface to use one. You simply plug it in to the USB port on your computer and away you go. While this makes recording easy, typically the quality of USB mics isn't as good as traditional dynamic or condenser mics. This isn't true for all models of USB mics, of course, and I'm sure there are some that would argue, but in my experience, it's generally true. But if you don't have the budget for a mixer or audio interface and you just want to start recording, especially for something like a podcast, a USB mic may be your best bet. Now that you know the types of microphones, let's talk about the different pickup patterns of microphones. A pickup pattern is exactly what it sounds like. It's an area around the microphone which receives sound input. If you look at this pattern, you can imagine the 0 as towards where the front of the mic is facing, 180 towards where the back of the mic is facing, with 90 and 270 to the left and right of the mic. This pattern also represents most of the mics you'll run into in the recording studio. It's the cardioid pattern, named so because it looks like a heart. As you can see, they're great at rejecting rear sounds, and it's a very directional microphone, which is perfect for live applications or where there's several mics at once and a lot of sound bouncing around. Supercardioid and hypercardioid are similar to cardioid, except that they are even more directional and reject more of the sides, with the hypercardioid variant being the more extreme of the two. Unlike cardioid, however, super and hypercardioids do pick up sound from the rear, which can make mic placement tricky. Omnidirectional is easy. It picks up sounds equally from all directions. The bidirectional or figure 8 pattern picks up sound from the front and back equally, creating the pattern you see here. These kind of mics have limited applications, such as recording 2 vocalists at once on either side of the mic, or recording a singer-songwriter that's playing a guitar and singing at the same time. But more than likely, you'll have 2 microphones that can separate the job of recording the guitar and the vocals. There are also microphones that offer multiple pickup patterns. You can usually toggle between the different settings via a switch located somewhere on the microphone itself. Finally, before we get into specific instruments and the best way to record them, know that microphones are further categorized by the size of their diaphragm. Generally split into large diaphragm microphones and small diaphragm microphones, they both have different characteristics and nuances. The small diaphragm mics typically have great response to sharp transients and overtones, whereas the large diaphragm mics have a wider application, from vocals to strings to drums to just about anything. I'm a guitarist, so let's start there. Guitar amps. For electric guitars, the most popular thing to do is take a dynamic mic and put it right against the grill of the guitar amp. Most people use the iconic Shure SM57, but you can also take a large diaphragm condenser mic and pull it back a few feet. If you want more room tone, pull it back even farther. If you're using a digital audio workstation or DAW, you'll probably have plenty of tracks to work with, so you can use multiple mics on separate tracks and then blend them together in the mix. Acoustic guitars are usually mic'd at the 12th fret with a small diaphragm microphone about 6 to 12 inches from the guitar. If the acoustic guitar is the only instrument in the song, or it's the main one, you'll probably want to experiment with multiple microphones at different distances to capture both the attack of the strings and a pleasing tone of the guitar in the room itself. Drums. You'll usually use a mixture of microphones here. A pair of small or large diaphragm condensers for the overheads, a small diaphragm condenser for the hi-hat, and cardioid dynamics for the kick, snare, and toms. If you only have access to 2 microphones, preferably both condensers, you can use the simple AB or spaced pair technique. Place the microphones above the kit to either side, but both equidistant from the center of the snare. This technique is prone to phase issues, so be sure to audition a quick mic check on the kit in mono to make sure it sounds okay before recording. There are more techniques for miking drums than there are pieces in your kit, so this will definitely be the subject of another video. Vocals. 99% of the time, you'll want to use a large diaphragm condenser mic. Place a pop filter in front of it to cut down on harsh plosives, and placement is dependent on the singer's preference and style that you're trying to capture. Experiment until you find something you like, or more importantly, what the vocalist likes. Strings. If you want an up-close sound with a fast attack, position a condenser mic 8 to 10 inches from the instrument. If you're looking for something a little creamier and airy, there are two methods to consider. Recording close to the instrument and adding digital reverb later, or recording in a larger room to capture natural reverb. The former I've already covered. For the latter, I'd suggest placing the mic a good 3 to 6 feet away from the instrument to help capture it in the room. Experiment with the mic facing the instrument, known as on-axis, and facing to the side of the instrument, known as off-axis. Again, these are simplified explanations, and each technique could be discussed at length. For every different method you may have used, the next recording engineer has 3. The main objective is to experiment and find what sounds good to you. If that means taping the mic stand to the ceiling with the microphone hanging from the XLR cable while your singer stands on his or her head while singing, well, if that's what it takes, go for it. What is your go-to mic? Or what's a favorite way to mic an instrument that I haven't mentioned? Leave your comments below, we'd love to hear them. Plus, I always like trying new recording methods. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Making Waves. Hey, before you go, a quick disclaimer. Whether you're recording in a professional top-of-the-line studio or just in your spare bedroom, nothing from this video or any other source you learn from is set in stone. If the general consensus says to use microphone XYZ, but you end up recording with microphone ABC and it still sounds great, then that's all that matters. These are just starting points, as there are virtually an infinite different amount of ways to mic a given instrument. And our plan is to eventually create separate videos on each instrument presented here and show you several different ways on how to do it. But for now, these basic tips should point you in the general direction. And I know some of you watching this may argue to the simplicity and generalization of these recommendations, but remember, most home recording studios do not have an arsenal of mics at their disposal. Which brings up one last thing before we finish. As a recording engineer, you'll need to make the best of the tools and the space available to you. Thanks.